Hi, David.
Alina, how are you doing?
Yes, how are you?
Okay. So I don't know if anyone else is going to come. We'll yeah, I was really hoping for more people. I mean, it did get some publicity, but obviously not enough. I can't help
Yeah.
his interest, but there's so many things of this kind going on. I realize, I'm in a very competitive field. People
That's the thing.
know my name.
Although I appreciate what you say. I mean, it's such a kind of such a topical, area at the moment as well, and I've even myself before, while I always kind of never kind of considered myself to be, a purely ecological minded person, and it was always sort of, I did my bit and I tried my best, but I wasn't kind of active in that sphere, but even for me, then coming from sort of that point of view and getting a bit more kind of knowledgeable over the years in relation to the situation, then it struck me as being very kind of really kind of pertinent that I kind of engage in this course. When I started it, it just felt like the right time. So yeah, hopefully some other people might kind of.
I mean, I've been
in on the
thinking
same sort of wavelength as well.
If the numbers are very low, Selena, what I will probably do is I will put a pause on it and look at how we can promote it more effectively, because I do think that there's a lot of people who could benefit, and it doesn't, I mean, I'm very happy to sit here and talk to you this evening. I had an hour-long conversation with somebody about it this morning, somebody who's doing research at Oxford, and we've got Heiko is here. That's great. So we've got at least 3 of us. That's good. Yeah. But really, I think it could reach more people, and I might want to look into that. I don't feel it's really doing you much of a favor to have such a small group. The group benefits from having more voices and more energy to it. Like I was just saying, the numbers are a lot lower than I had envisaged for this course. And I was thinking that I had messed up with the website, but actually I didn't. It is on the website. So, it's gone through the UK Eco-Dharma network, and it's gone out on a special mailing to all the people in the Jameng Leeds. There's 1,000 people who received that email. So I'm not sure why it's not getting the response that I had imagined it would. So I was just saying to Selena, I'll teach tonight, but it might make sense, rather than just continuing and just having like 2 or 3 people, to put a pause on this series and look at how we could promote it more effectively and restart it maybe in a few weeks' time, or at the new year or something. I mean, it feels like, sort of contradictory, because it's such an urgent problem to be postponing it. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, yeah, here's Tim. Oh, very good. Okay, so Tim was not here last week, but he's here tonight. So good. Well, at least we have a full screen of people on my gallery view. Hi, Tim.
Hello.
Lovely to see you, and nice kind of eco-Buddhist image there.
Thank you. I'm sure you recognise it. You've been there.
Well, I've been to both of those places, actually. Yeah, there's 2 places in the photograph. Yeah. I don't know if you both know, but the stupas in the front are at Kopan Monastery, and was obviously in the back is Mount Kailash. So I went to both of those in 2013. Okay, so yeah, I kind of feel like we're just about quarate.
Really good.
Yeah, I was saying, Tim, I had been hoping for more people, obviously, and it has had a little bit more publicity than it did last time. So I'm not sure. We'll see how it goes. But if the numbers stay very small, I might just kind of put it on pause and see if we can maybe restart it with a, more promotion. But we'll see what happens.
Okay.
See what happens. So anyway, I will continue for tonight at least. We'll see where we go from there.
Okay.
So let's start with a bit of meditation, as I always do. So this is the moment to just flick the off switch on your motor that's been driving you through the day, whatever you've been doing, and just have the luxury of taking a little bit of time to interrupt the train of thoughts. It's a very apt term, isn't it? It's like a train, like a locomotive chuntering through our brain. So we can just let it coast gently to a halt and bring our awareness to our body, which is often the best way to do that, to quieten down and slow down the compulsive train of thought. And just notice what's going on in your body. Notice if there are tense muscles in the shoulders. Move your shoulders around a little bit, maybe to allow them to just move freely. What we want to do is to try to make gentle movements to really free up and release all the joints in our body. So you can just give some attention to the pelvic bones and see if they're a bit rigid. Move them around a bit, move them into a comfortable position. As you breathe in and out, let the ribs expand so that the muscles around the chest and the back can be loose. Notice if the muscles in your face, your cheeks and your jaw, are they tight? Again, move your jaw around. Let those muscles relax. Breathe in a few deep breaths through the nose and out through the mouth to just really let go of some more physical tension or nervous tension. And then just let the breath rise and fall naturally, settle back into awareness of your body. So there's a lot of activity there as well. And we can bring our attention to it. Just notice those physical processes and movements that are going on, especially with the breathing, but everything else as well. Observe how the sensations are changing moment by moment, moving around. And as you adopt this attitude of a neutral observer, just not getting involved, but noticing what's happening in your body and your mind. Notice the stillness that comes from that. It's without judgment, without wanting to change anything. Just noticing, just being aware of what's occurring within your body and mind. And as you bring awareness to those physical processes, be aware also that they are not separate, they're not disconnected from the physical processes that are happening outside your body. So the air that you're breathing in, the oxygen in the air, is being breathed out by the trees. You can be aware of them out there in the environment, trees and all the leaves of all the plants, just like you are breathing in and out. So it's that ceaseless, silent activity of transformation. They are taking in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen, and we're doing the opposite. And just as the blood's circulating around your body, bring in the nutrients to the cells in every part of your body. Same way the sap is rising up the trunks of the trees, bringing the minerals and other substances from the soil and from the rain up into the body of the plants, to the leaves. The uncountable trillions of tiny creatures in the soil and on the surfaces of all the plants and inside them, continually exchanging energy and materials with one another. This infinitely complex and infinitely miraculous web of life, of which your body is just another example. So this incredible miracle of life is what is going on our blue-green planet, 93 million miles from the sun. Here in England or Ireland, across the sea, in America, in the rainforest, in the Amazon, even in the Antarctic, there is life. Even at the bottom of the deep ocean, in the volcanic vents, where the continents are drifting apart, these are teeming with life. And yet we consider ourselves to be separate from nature. And we treat nature as if it were a lifeless material. cut down the forests. We spray thousands of tons of deadly chemicals over the crops to kill the insects. We wash away the soils with nitrate fertilizer. We drag the ocean bed with giant machines that destroy the complex web of life on the ocean floor. Because we do not perceive the phenomenon of life. This ineffable and mysterious thing that we call life, which has been going on for more than 3,000 million years on our planet, has incredible capacities of resilience and self-regeneration. Many times, the vast majority of species have been wiped out in great geological upheavals, but life is still here. It's full of suffering, but it's also full of incredible beauty and joy. Only now, it seems, are we beginning, just beginning to understand what it is. But we have to do more than understand it with our intellectual mind. We have to train our awareness to be able to connect that awareness at a deep intuitive level, to be deeply aware of what this life is, the spirit of life that animates our world, our planet, and that we are totally not separate from. We are just one manifestation among millions of different manifestations of life. The most urgent crisis that humanity has ever faced is for us to repair our relationship to life. To this mysterious, awe-inspiring, amazing, living being that is called Gaia, the totality of life. Scientists have suggested should best be understood as actually a single living being, And we should understand our relationship to that being as if we are cells within its body. And we must urgently and immediately abandon our delusion that we are the masters of the earth. And this awakening can happen in each one of us individually. Of course, it's not just a flick of a switch. It's a process that takes time to fully integrate that awareness. And the more of us that do make that journey, that inner journey to this deep attunement with the spirit of life, with our humble situation as cells in the body of Gaia, then the more possibility, the more chance there is that the collective mind of humanity will wake up in time, perhaps, to prevent the catastrophe that so many voices have been warning is coming upon us. So I suggest we, just in silence for a couple of minutes, reflect on this situation and on how important, therefore, it would be for each one of us to make a commitment, an inner commitment to that journey of awareness. It may be just a slightly different way to think about or to image our Buddhist path. Can we really bring together our understanding of that path as it was taught in ancient times and through history and Asian Buddhist traditions, with this very inspiring but also alarming ecological understanding of what is happening. So any one person, in my view, any one person who makes that journey and really deepening their understanding and their awareness in that way is making a significant contribution. Let's just take 2 or 3 minutes to reflect on that, each in our own way. So now, just as a suggestion, take a minute or so to think about one thing that you could do. Be any type of thing. It might be set aside some time to find out more, or sign up. There are thousands of petitions that one can sign. It could be anything that just to put one drop onto the gathering lake of individual actions that people are taking to try to quench the flames of the ecological crisis. Just think of one thing, and it's an invitation, it's not an order. But if you would like, just think of one thing that you could do, and then take that inner decision. Okay, I'm going to do one small thing. So let's gently come back from the meditation. Okay. So, yeah, I think I probably said it before last time about small is beautiful, didn't I? Small groups are good. Small groups are good. As long as there's lots of them. So we are one of many groups, large and small. And I think it's important to remember that. So I'm going to talk for quite a short time, because then I want to open up to an open question, really. But I just kind of introduce that for a few minutes, and then we can just explore this question. So I'm going to begin with an apology. Actually, I heard a talk once by Kurt Vonnegut in the City Museum in York. He gave a talk, and he said that he somebody or other said you should never begin a talk with an apology, and he said, well, I'm going to break that rule, and he said, I'm sorry about everything, and I'll try to make it up to you. And I thought that was the best introduction to a talk that you could give, Ruth. But my apology is a little bit more humble than that. It's just I still have not got all the way through David Loy's book on Eco-Dharma. So I was hoping that I could kind of not wrap it up with that book, but I want to talk about a lot of other books, actually. The last time I did this, the series of talks, it was each talk was based on a video, but this time it seems to be moving towards books, and I think that's also good. The links are all there on our resource page on the website if you're interested. So to look at any of those videos, and some of them are very, very interesting. But also these books, some of them I've had for a long time, and they're not as well known as I think they should be. So that's one reason why I want to talk about them. But I do think that David Loy's book is it's a very good kind of presentation of where things are at right now, I guess, is one way to put it. Because, of course, as this situation changes, as the ecological crisis unfolds, different responses are needed at different times. I mean, when I was first interested in getting involved in ecological activism, no one that I knew about was talking about climate change at all. That was in the early 1980s. it was something that was being discussed by a few scientists, and that was all. 10 years later, it was right in the front of the headlines. So, you know, the situation changed quite a lot. So at that time, you know, it looked more hopeful because there had just been the Montreal Protocol banning CFCs, which had been causing the hole in the ozone layer. And that was a very effective piece of international action that was taken to tackle an environmental problem. So then it looked like the same might happen with climate change. I mentioned this last week, that we had the Rio summit and then we had the Kyoto conference, and that was all looking very hopeful, but then it was basically sabotaged. I'm going to mention another book at this point. And where is it? Here it is. Yeah, this book is very interesting, called The Compassionate Revolution by David Edwards. David Edwards is a journalist, and so he's got a very good understanding of how you know, the media are used by vested interests to distort people's perceptions and of things. And I'm going to see if I can find this quote, but if not, I can remember pretty much what it says. I'll just from memory, but he quotes, at the time of the Kyoto conference, you know, this first global conference on climate change, and there was a lot of disinformation being put out by the fossil fuel industries, questioning whether, you know, the science behind global warming and saying it's not true. And the quote is from one of the people, you know, from an industry alliance in that industry, who said something, I don't know if I can get it exactly word for word, pretty well word for word. He said, what we are doing, and we think successfully, is buying time for our industries by, you know, by confusing the discourse, by sort of, you know, preventing action on climate change. So then this became, you know, a central issue in the environmental debate. You know, how do we stop, or how do we tackle, how do we respond to deliberate attempts to sabotage efforts to save the global ecosystem from destruction? I mean, it's an extraordinary thing to make it your purpose to do, it seems to me. The people involved are highly intelligent people. One of the leading figures in that, you know, those attempts to sort of confuse and mislead the public about climate change and to deny its reality from the point of view of vested interests, was the chief executive of Exxon Corporation, the highest paid corporate executive in history at the time. He was paid over $1 billion in salary in the 10 years that he was there. And he set up this coalition, you know, which established kind of phony quasi-scientific institutions and so on, producing fake research saying that climate change wasn't happening and so on. And I once, I was at a workshop, it's about a 4-day workshop on, it was kind of somewhat business-oriented workshop. Well, the organization was an organization that did consulting for businesses. And one of the people leading the workshop had been an employee of Exxon. So she's very committed environmentally. And I was interested because I talked about this man, I said, well, what about him? And she genuinely believed that he sincerely believed that climate change was a hoax, that, academics around the world had got together and formed this conspiracy that they were going to pretend that there was this thing called climate change, and in order so that they could get more funding. Now that man would not have been being paid $60 million a year if he was that stupid. But he was good at convincing people that he genuinely believed it. Now, why am I saying all this? One of the things, that I mentioned last week about the book that it was interesting me, and I want to know more about David Loy's kind of views on this, is the very important distinction between something that is an action or a mindset or thought of an individual, and something that is an action that is, or a thought or a mindset that is a collective mindset or a collective action. So we talk about systemic problems. So, I say to people who are very upset about Donald Trump and think that Donald Trump is the problem. I don't think Donald Trump is the problem. I think the problem is that Donald Trump was elected. And that has to do with systemic problems in the, in the American political system, and in the media, and in the economic system, and in the societal, the whole way that that society works as a whole. Now, climate change and the ecological crisis generally, I do want to kind of try to avoid sort of bundling everything into climate change as if climate change were the problem. Climate change is probably the most significant single dimension of the problem. Although you could say equally that habitat destruction is just as important. Anyway, the ecological crisis is a systemic problem. It's not a matter of lots and lots of individuals deciding to turn the heating down 1 degree or have solar panels. That's important. But one of the reasons why we tend to feel a sense of powerlessness around the issue is that whilst many, many individuals are doing their bit, everybody doing their bit is not enough. There has to be systemic change. And we don't know how to act in order to bring systemic change. It's a question. This is the question that I wanted to bring to the group, really. And I had a look at David Loy's, my apology was pertinent because it's in the last bit of the book that he talks about that, and I haven't read all of it. But I just want to read something. This is not by him, actually, it's an appendix. This appendix it's written by somebody called Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's worked very closely with David Loy. There's a statement, a Buddhist declaration on climate change, which was very widely circulated a short while ago and signed by the Dalai Lama and many, many other people. And that was written jointly by David Loy and Bhikkhu Bodhi. So we can presume, I guess, that his views are very similar. And so the question is, it's getting real about climate change, simple and practical steps. Okay. And so here are some of the simple and practical steps that we can take, according to Bhikkhu Bodhi. Impose a moratorium on fossil fuel extraction. Rescind subsidies to fossil fuel corporations. Impose a carbon tax. Reject trade agreements that allow corporations to prevail over sovereign governance. Reject mega pipelines. Prohibit oil trains. Shift away from a model of industrial agriculture. Well, I don't know how to do any of those things, right? I can't do any of those things. And therein lies the problem. You know, we all can eat more organic vegetables and have solar panels and so on, but that in itself, we know in our hearts, isn't going to solve that systemic problem. It takes all of those things that were mentioned there as simple practical steps. These are simple practical steps that are systemic, that can be taken, that can be brought about by legislation, by international agreements, you know, those kind of actions. And I think this is the key to the sense of powerlessness that people feel around this issue. More and more and more people are seriously concerned about climate change and doing all they can. But, you know, in a sense, nothing is happening. I mean, we are continuing to burn more fossil fuels and cut down more rainforests and so on. So the problem seems to be untouched by everything that we can do about it. Now, who is we? So here, you know, the Speaker Bodhi, and I don't want to, you know, you know, denigrate him in any way at all. I'm sure, you know, he's doing wonderful and fantastic work, and so is David Loy. But this seems to me to be right in the heart of the problem. We don't really know how to act to bring about that kind of change. We can vote. Well, we know how much difference that makes. You know, we don't. Our votes do not control the outcome of elections. What controlled the outcome of the election, last presidential election in the US, was, you know, was a technology company that had figured out how to engineer Facebook to change people's minds, change people's opinions, and change their votes. You know, that's a somewhat dramatic overstatement, but there's a great deal of truth in that. You know that, and David Edwards' book is extremely good. Compassionate Revolution. A lot of it is about how there is this systemic manipulation of opinion by vested interest. And coming back to, I'm trying to remember the guy's name actually, that's CEO. But anyway, yeah, I'm going to tell a story about corporations. So I believe this to be a true story. It's told me by my brother, who ought to know, he's got an MBA. He's interested in corporate things. And he said it was, I think it was a financial company in the city of London. But anyway, it was that type of company, you know. And they had hired a psychologist to analyze and critique their HR procedures, their selection procedures for their staff. And in his report, this psychologist said, his conclusion was, well, these selection procedures that you have, that you use in your interviews, are selecting for people with psychopathic tendencies. And then what the company then did was they changed those procedures and interview techniques and so on, so that they would select more effectively for psychopathic people, quite consciously. Why? Because they knew that people with psychopathic tendencies have a tendency to, you know, they tend to perform very well in a corporate environment that is solely oriented towards making profit. So one has to assume that the people who made that decision were themselves, you know, that kind. As I've read in a few places, it's 7% of the population that have this tendency. Psychopathy, basically, I think you can say, is a pathological absence of compassion. That is the psychological condition that we're talking about. Now, people who really do not care, are not interested in the harmful effects of their actions on others, unless that would rebound onto them. I read a very interesting book about, actually, it's called confessions of a sociopath. That's the other word that's used. It's not psychopath is one term, sociopath is another, and there's debates about what exactly is the distinction between them. But we have a system, an economic system, which institutionalizes and reinforces that kind of motivation. Now, I don't want to kind of get into sort of demonizing any group or anything, or even the system itself. Bringing in that fact of psychopathy kind of makes it rather dramatic. But it's a dysfunctional system, that's for sure. And this sort of systemic structures are blocking the change that we know needs to happen. And so it can appear extremely hopeless. So, I wanted to bring this out because it's not that I don't think there are any answers to this, right? But it can seem that way. And it can seem like, people really tear their hair out, people who are totally committed and feeling like, I'm giving my life to this cause, and so are hundreds of thousands of other people, and we're getting absolutely nowhere. It feels that way. It feels like we're getting absolutely nowhere. But I'm not convinced that that's actually true. So I'm going to share the screen in a moment, and I'm going to just show you something that somebody sent me on an email today. Find this. All right, yes, it's there. Not this. And not that, actually. Oh, no. Oh, sorry. Where's it gone? Here we are. Right. Okay, from The Guardian. 60 world leaders have gathered on Zoom, presumably, to declare that their top priorities after the COVID crisis is over is biodiversity and climate change, dealing with that. Very strong statement. Boris Johnson was there, Angela Merkel, 64 leaders from 5 continents. Okay, Donald Trump wasn't there. Okay, what's his name? Xi Jinping, Chinese leader, wasn't there, and so on. Nevertheless, this is some of the people, some of the top leaders, some of the leaders who didn't sign the UN treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons recently. Was signed by around 150 countries, but all the 6 nuclear nations didn't sign it. Certainly pretty meaningless. But this, I don't think this is meaningless, even though China and the US haven't signed. I think that it is a sign of the times. I think it is a sign of what's been happening as the environmental movement has grown and matured over the years, and it's slowly risen up through the levels of the system until it's now reaching right to the very top of that system. And the thing is, the way this system functions is that it doesn't change until it changes right at the top, because, it's a system of control. So things will look as though nothing is changing, 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 and then quite suddenly, oh, it's all different. And this is what happened in the Soviet Union, isn't it? In 1989, 88, 89, I forget, I think it was 88, Mikhail Gorbachev took over as a leader, and he could see that the system could not continue. If he tried to continue operating the system as it had been being done, then there would be a bloodbath. There would have been a catastrophe, because the system was simply no longer functioning to, fulfill the needs of the citizens. And this global system of globalized capitalism is in the same position. It's, it's in a condition of breakdown, meltdown. And if one reads up on systems theory, you might recognize that this is quite typical of a lot of natural systems, that, they appear to be in a stable condition, but in actual fact, change is happening within the system that's not visible because there are certain parameters that are sort of locked in place. They are defining the state of the system. But then as things are happening, it's subtly changing in its interior, if you like. At a certain point, it suddenly will kind of go into a fluid state and it will reform itself in a different configuration. So this happens with many natural systems. And I think that's what we saw happening in the Soviet Union. It happened with the apartheid system. It was no longer possible for that system to maintain itself. And very quickly and without huge violence, there was violence, but it wasn't terrible compared to what had been happening for generations in South Africa. And what appeared to be a completely frozen situation suddenly thawed. And I wonder if we are at one of those tipping points. And I was complaining earlier on, there's so few people on this call, but the reason for that, and part of the reason for that, is because an awful lot of people are on other things. So, for instance, one of the things that's happening, and we'll talk about this, I think probably next time. I mentioned last time Thomas Hübl is German spiritual teacher and psychotherapist, who has this project addressing collective trauma healing. And right at the moment, we're I think we're in the 9th day of a 10-day global collective trauma healing summit conference that he's organized on Zoom. And 85,000 people are taking part in that. And this is really a conference about how can we transform the collective consciousness of our society, our civilization, our species, if you like. His analysis, which I think is very interesting, is that the dysfunctional nature of our present society and our present economic and social and political systems are the product of generations of trauma, of intense suffering that has been experienced by individuals, by families, by tribes, by social groups, by women, by children, by every group within society that has been oppressed, damaged, almost exterminated, these terrible things that have happened. And we are, as living beings, we do have a natural self-healing capacity, but it can get stuck. If there's something that happens to us that's too traumatic, that we can't process it, it gets locked into our bodies. And, it permanently affects the way that we are and the way that we think, and it affects our health. And these traumas are not just individual, but collective. They affect whole races, nations, social groups, and so on. So, this is one perspective on how, on what kind of a shift in consciousness, a transformation of consciousness is what I called it last time around this series, what that might look like. And his techniques, I think, are very effective, and he's able to use this big sort of arena of many thousands of people connecting via this technology to create, he calls it a collective field of consciousness that can be created. And it might sound a bit airy-fairy, but it isn't airy-fairy. It's very scientific, actually, how he speaks about it. So this is happening on a huge scale, especially at the moment with the, the lockdown or whatever we call it, situation that we're in. People are in very big numbers are coming together in this way. And it's been happening and building up for years and years and years, but it seems to be like, in this situation, it's kind of exploding. And it almost seems like we really might be very close to this tipping point. And so when I saw this headline about 60 world leaders making that declaration, yeah, something quite dramatic of a positive nature might be happening. And I just want to bring that into balance the terrifying, news about the negative side of the picture. But I want to say, for me personally, it's up for grabs which one of those is going to prevail. This apocalyptic doom scenario that we keep hearing about, or this extraordinary upsurge of global awareness and motivation around the ecological crisis. So what I want to throw, the question I wanted to throw into the group is this: okay, what do you think we, that is to say, you, me, this group, larger groups, etc., can do about the systemic sort of problem, the collective mindset of our society? Is it just a case of we do our little bit with, reducing our own ecological footprint? Is it about political protest, extinction rebellion? This is a question that really fascinates me, interests me very deeply and has done for many, many years. And I would just like to share that question with you and see what comes out in the discussion. It's a collective systemic problem. And that's one reason why we find it so disheartening when what we do doesn't seem to make a difference. But it may be making a difference in a different and more subtle way, if you like. So, okay, that's halfway through our evening. So just like to hear any reactions to that and any questions or thoughts or ideas about, the theme here. And we're going to have a workshop specifically on this, by the way, in December. What I'm interested in is how we get beyond this sense of powerlessness, because we all know there's a very urgent problem and feel we should do something, but we get very perplexed when we think about what can we do. Tim, were you?
I'm going to go with some thoughts.
Yeah, please.
Feeling really quite down about the whole situation. I don't see much happening, and I'm cynical about some of what the politicians say, what they'll actually do. But I was very interested and heartened by what you were saying about systems analysis and how that things are perhaps going on that we don't necessarily see. So that seemed like a chink of light in what's largely a very bleak picture from the way I see things.
Absolutely, Tim. Yeah. So this is very interesting. Chaos theory and complexity theory this is very new field, and you do get these sudden dramatic changes in systems where, if you analyze what's happening in the system, you can see that there's been a long build up to them, but there are, and at any one moment, there's certain parameters that define the kind of global state of the system, and those stay fixed until it passes a threshold, and then they change very suddenly. And this is very characteristic of natural systems. And I do think that this is happening on many levels. I think that it's happening with the ecosystem itself, clearly. That is, it's going from more gradual change to much more rapid change. And it all does look rather black. And I don't know, I mean, yeah.
There's an economist called Steve Keen who uses systems theory, and he created a model using Minsky, and he successfully predicted the financial crisis in 2008, showing how we'd have a period of stability, and then the system would suddenly go out of kilter.
Yeah.
And hopefully something's happening where we have this what appears to be stability that will suddenly change rapidly.
That's right. So we tend to think about things in terms of a sort of certain idea model, sort of more or less linear model of change.
Yeah.
But change in natural systems doesn't happen in a linear fashion.
That's
clear. And the human sort of collective psyche, if you like, what we're talking about, is a complex system of that kind. And I think it's, in the nature of that system, there's no doubt that it potentially can undergo very sudden flip, and that may well happen. And we see it. Have we seen it happen in a smaller scale in things like the Soviet Union and so on? Often profound social change happens very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think it's I do think it's important for us to kind of bring that thought in when we get rather stuck in, it's all just going, it can seem like this very sort of juggernaut that's just cannot be stopped. But there are other ways to picture what's happening. And I think if we kind of can get our mind out of being stuck in that juggernaut picture, it helps to, first of all, we don't have to feel so bad, because I don't think the juggernaut picture is accurate. I think it is, it's just an image. Secondly, it can open up the possibility of, we have to believe that change is possible. Otherwise, we can't really act effectively on its path.
I believe we've got the science there and the economics there to do and make a huge difference. It's the political will that seems to be
political will is exactly the problem, and that's exactly what I'm talking about, Tim. Yeah. What is political will? How is it created? Very interesting question. And I think there are, the answers to that question have changed. I mean, it used to be that if you owned all the newspapers, you could control what people, the collective psyche, if you like, you can, you're in charge. Now newspapers are, well, it's only one source of influence, and what's happening through social media and so on. Very complex dynamics are happening, and nefarious people are trying to manipulate them. But other people are also, using those media very skillfully. So I think Zoom is a sudden kind of. I mean, I've been using Zoom for about 4 years. Actually, Thomas Hubel course that I did that introduced me to Zoom. But suddenly, it's gone from a relatively minor thing to everybody is using this technology, which is probably the most powerful communication tool that there is, isn't it?
Zoom's great. I'm on it for 5-6 days a week.
Yeah, I mean, you can communicate absolutely anything virtually instantaneously to a large group of people all around the world. You've never seen anything like that. It's tremendously powerful, and nobody can say what the effect of that is in how collectively we are thinking. But one thing that's clear to me is there's a huge amount of activity around ecology and how we can, tackle these crises. So I'm not sort of resolutely pessimistic, because really the conclusion I've come to is, after thinking about it for many years and having many different opinions over the years, I really don't know. I know a lot about this. I've studied it in depth for decades, and I have no idea what's going to happen. So I think it's good to just drop the optimism and the pessimism and say, well, what are the best things that we can be doing? And also, as Buddhists, let's also live now. And David Lloyd does give that message very eloquently in his book, and in other ways, and quotes a lot of people like Thich Nhat Hanh and so on very powerfully about this. But what's the point of saving humanity for another 1,000 years if we spend the next 1,000 years worrying about what's going to happen 50 years ahead. We never experience life now. So, that's another part of it. As Buddhists, I think I had an hour-long interview this morning with a researcher in Oxford who's researching into engaged Buddhism. It's very interesting, talking to her. And what was I going to say now? Lost my thread. Sorry, come back to me. But yeah, engaged Buddhism. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I know what I was going to say. This message that if we really take to heart the true message of the Buddha, then what we do about this situation isn't we sit on our cushion and try to attain nirvana for ourselves. We have to get stuck in there and do things. Right. Now, I'm not one of those who say that everybody has to be a political activist or everybody has to grow organic vegetables. I think Tenzin Palmo, who went into solitary retreat in a cave for 12 years, was just as much of an activist as anybody else, So for some people, there's this term spiritual activism, which is quite an interesting term. And that can be just doing spiritual practice. But for most people, I would have to question that. There is always this danger that it can be an avoidance of getting involved in the world, running away from the world. I don't think that's what Buddhism generally should be saying, and so I'm looking at these books, and most of these books are in a way engaged Buddhism books. But engaged, but she was asking me, what is it, and I said, well, yes, many people make the case that all Buddhism is, by its nature, is engaged. We're all trying to solve the human problem, the fundamental human problem, if you like. But there is this distinctive strand within it where political action and environmental action and so on an external level, are seen to be important. And so what I was really going to say was, yeah, we can do both of those things. We can act as best we're able to try to, respond constructively to the problem. And we can also live in the now, experience, take joy in living in the present moment, because really that's all we've got. So we act, and we are alive and present in our acting without being flooded with anxiety about the outcome, because we don't know the outcome one way or another. I don't know, did I tell this story last time? If I did, forgive me, but I'm going to tell it again because I think it's a very important story. Because my activist journey began actually just before my Buddhist journey. One led to the other. It was the activism that came first. And so it was in the 1980s, and it was a much more scary time than now. There was real reason to believe that the human race was going to be wiped out by a nuclear holocaust. And that was a realistic thought. And I read in some kind of news bulletin that was coming from the movement, I can't remember where I read it, about a man who took his 6-year-old daughter and walked into a lake and drowned himself and his daughter because he was convinced that the nuclear holocaust was coming and that there was no hope. And then that didn't happen. So that, to me, is a very powerful and important cautionary tale, not to get immersed in pessimism, because we really don't know the future.
I think maybe the important point on that is as well, they're not just two outcomes. The two outcomes are not just it's going to be utter catastrophe and the whole of humanity perishes,
Yeah.
and no one survives and everything is going to be hunky-dory. There's going to be any possible outcome in between. And any little 0.1 degree of warming in between those two outcomes that can be avoided is going to make a massive, massive difference to millions and millions of people, into their quality of lives, how long they're going to live. So it's very much a matter of degree of, and it's not just everything fine and catastrophe, but everything, every little bit we can achieve and that we can contribute to is going to make a massive difference to uncountable number of people.
Yeah, thank you, Heiko. That is a really good point. So this binary thinking is, is a real problem, and it's very interesting. I mean, I think from Buddhist point of view, very interesting because, the conceptual mind is by its nature, formed with binary thinking, isn't it? It either is or it isn't, one or the other. So either or. This either or logic is built into the structure of our conceptual thought. But reality isn't binary. Reality is continuous. So there are, there's an infinite realm of different possibilities. And so everything that we do, I think, it connects with another important Buddhist point about karma, which is that we should really take to heart this Buddhist teaching of karma, that whatever positive action we do will really create a positive result. Yeah, because with this binary thinking, we can get trapped into thinking, well, I could put all my energies into this and, do the best I possibly can, and then it would have no result whatever. It would just, make no difference at all. And if we accept a Buddhist, I think not only, just the traditional teachings on karma, but if we think those teachings on karma are related to the view of interdependence, that the world does not consist of separate objects which come into being and then are annihilated, but it is a continuous flow, it's a process. Right, and so whatever, when an individual person or animal or plant or whatever dies, life is not dying. Life is continuing, and we, as we did in the meditation, as we looked at in the meditation, we are really part of this seamless web of life, but we imagine ourselves to be separate individuals within it. And we imagine that life is composed of these discrete, separate individuals. And again, this is the conceptual mind and the binary thinking, So if we can integrate that understanding of interdependence and flow, if you like, life is one continuous flow. And yes, there are, we can say, well, here's a plant, here's a person, here's a tree, and yes, we can say this is a birth and this is a death. But these are like, if you imagine, a river with sort of, stones on the bed of the river and so on that are causing ripples and eddies swirling down the river. It's kind of like that, Really, all there is water. But you can say, oh, there's an eddy, there's a little whirlpool's just started there, and then it disperses and it's not there anymore. That's what life and death are really like. The river continues. The river of life continues. And so the law of karma tells us, that if you start a whirlpool that's going round this way, it's going to continue going on this way. You know, there's a relationship between the nature of an event that happens and what that then gives rise to as it flows on down the river of time, I guess. So that brings me back to, you know, to Heiko's point, that whatever we do, whatever positive action we do, creates a positive result, right? And when we think in this kind of binary logic way, we can lose that understanding and think that our actions could be useless, but they're not. You know, everything we do has value and brings result, and it continues, you know. So thank you for that. It's a really good point, Heiko. Any other thoughts?
I think in David Loy's book, Bill McKibben, he's being asked what's the most important thing to do as an individual, and his reply is the most important thing to do is as an individual is stop being an individual. Yeah. And I think that's sort of a very important point. Like, and I mostly read that in the way of well, engage politically on the issue, join forces with other people, don't try to solve it on your own in your own life, but yeah, join up with others, and that is where the force will come from to change things. And there are historical thinking of civil rights movements which achieved extraordinary things, or on other human rights issues, or Indian independence, or what it is, like that these movements can have like very powerful effects, and that is people just joining together, like, and yeah, acting together.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, when I was working with Joanna Macy in the 1980s, and that was a big theme of her work, was that, which at the time it was called despair and empowerment work. You know, there's a lot of ecological despair around at the moment, but nuclear despair was a really big thing. You know, people, you know, it's hopeless, we can't do anything. And she connected it, I think, quite rightly with this, you know, this sense of isolation, of separateness, and the empowerment comes through when we connect with others in a particular way, because when we are acting in a way, I mean, it's quite hard to sort of, I think, clearly state what that kind of connection is. It's not just that you're, you know, necessarily just that you're kind of marching down the road together or something. You might be doing that, but a sense of acting as, you know, not acting as an individual, you're acting collectively. There was a sense of it's not me that's doing this. It's hard to describe, but sometimes when you're engaged in an action of that kind, you really do no longer feel like this is me doing it. You know, we are doing it. You don't feel separate. You feel like there is a collective identity of everybody in that action together. So the imaginary walls around the self can come down, can dissolve. And then the sense of powerlessness also dissolves at that point, there's a tremendous sense of empowerment that can come from that collective action. I don't think I've kind of spoken very clearly about that, but maybe you all have some taste or experience of what that's like.
And I think that sense of power isn't just subjective, but it's a very objective increase in power as well. No one is interested in what you have to say as an individual. But if it's like 100 of you, people start to listen. If it's 100,000, people will certainly listen to what you have to say and what your point is.
Yeah.
And yeah, and action and things happen. So it's like, yeah, that I guess you sense that as well, like as an individual, like, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I may be naive, but I was, you know, encouraged by that the declaration that's just been made. Of course, declarations have been made before. And of course, you know, the US wasn't there and China wasn't there and so on. But it was, you know, several of the major world powers were there. So, and it was a very, very strong statement. And I think it's happening in the context of, you know, this sort of lockdown, meltdown, whatever it is that's going on with this pandemic. A lot of the kind of, you know, rail tracks of normality have been suspended. So it does seem to me this opens up a possibility of something different happening. And the global voices calling for action on climate change have been getting stronger and stronger and stronger, you know, and they also have accelerated during the pandemic, I think, because of the opportunity. And as people, I don't know, it's difficult to say, because of course being prevented from being out on the street so much. But yeah, I mean, the other day there were 3,500 school strikes around the world, you know, I don't think there's been activism on this scale globally before, ever, actually. One of the things that I will talk about, one of the books I will talk about, which David Lloyd talks about, is Paul Hawkin's Blessed Unrest, which is an analysis of social activist movements. So Paul Hawkin, you know, I mean, he's been an eco-activist for nearly 60 years. I think he started the first sort of ecological business really in the States with a Whole Foods, you know, store that was very successful. And he wrote. He's quite interesting because he's a businessman who is completely and totally dedicated to ecology. Anyway, he was finding as he was going around, you know, the lecture circuit, every time he would give a talk, after the talk, most of the audience would go home, but then like 15 or 20, 25 people would be clustering around him, asking him questions. And they would all be telling him about their little environmental group or social justice group or racial justice or whatever, you know, there's, and he got very interested. There seemed to be an awful lot of these, and he started to do some research. And after a while, he concluded, well, there's well over 100,000 of these groups. And he continued doing the research. Well, there's more than that. Eventually, this was in the 1990s sometime. I can't remember exactly when the book was published, but he did a really big research project and compiled a database of over 2 million social and environmental change organizations that existed at that time. I think it might have been 2009, the book, but it certainly wasn't later than that. But now there will be many more now, because the reason why there's so many is because it was becoming easier and easier with computer technology and the internet to establish these groups. And now it's become much easier again. So literally millions and millions of different groups that are, you know, he said it has no top-down hierarchy. It's completely self-organizing. He calls it the immune system of the planet. The biggest, most powerful social movement in history is what we're seeing it now, I think, coming to a point where it is rivaling the power of nation states and giant corporations. I really do think that. And it's being listened to more. So my anxiety about the ecological crisis now, I think, is beginning to be less about the political will. Insofar as I have anxiety about it, it's about, well, it's very late in the day, isn't it? This crisis has gone very, very far indeed. And we're not talking about the possibility of climate change. We're seeing the reality of it every day.
Oh, yeah.
Wildfires and God knows what. It's like, the most terrifying statistic that I heard, I was involved in organizing this Leeds Festival of Compassion. And the last day of it was Compassion for the Planet. And we had a panel discussion there. And there was somebody there on there who's actually, she was representing Extinction Rebellion, but she was a biologist from Leeds University. And she said that since, I can't remember, it was 1950 or 1970, whichever year it was, since that year, let's say it was 1950, we've experienced globally 68% biodiversity loss. 68% of species have already become extinct. That was an incredible statistic to me. So, we're talking about big stuff here. But I'm not any longer deeply pessimistic about the possibility that the political will come together. I think it may well do. And I think we might see that in the pretty near future. One of the talks I gave last time was actually about a video by Paul Hawkin. And the title of it, I can't remember which, maybe it was that one, Climate Change is the Hope, but the most, I think it was the most positive, he's an incredibly positive man, he's really, if you want to hear uplifting positive messages about all this, listen to Paul Hawkin, because he's resolutely positive and optimistic, and he's not, turning his gaze away from anything. He's fully aware of the depth of the problem. He understands it as well as anybody, but he's very, very optimistic. Anyway, where was I coming from? Yeah. Once the political will is there, I come back to things like President Kennedy saying, was it in 1960 or 61? He said, by 1970, we're going to put a man on the moon. And all the people who were going to have to do it, they were like, what? They never heard, they just came, he apparently just came up with it on the spur of the moment. Okay. And, he hadn't consulted anybody about whether it was possible. Just said, we're going to do it. And they did it. Human beings.
Well after his term.
Pardon?
He knew well after his term.
Well, I don't know, but yeah. Yes, he would have. That's right. If he'd served 2 terms, he would have just retired. But he looked pretty silly if they were nowhere near it by the end. If he had survived 2 terms, he would have looked a bit stupid. So it was it's very gung ho. We can. Yes, we can. That was Barack Obama's slogan, wasn't it? And and so Paul Hawkin gave this talk about yes, we can. If the will was there, could we do it? And he's quite convincing. But things have to change fairly dramatically. But I've always thought, if the human, if our civilization could collectively truly get behind this project with the same kind of commitment as some of the individuals and some of the groups that are trying to stop climate change, if the whole society, the whole global civilization, collectively took on board that kind of commitment, that we could do incredible things. Yes, things look very, very bad indeed for the ecosystem, but I still don't think that a complete, ecological collapse is inevitable by any means. I come back to, we don't know.
Still time at the moment.
Yeah.
You wonder-
I'm wondering if you've got any thoughts. Yes.
Actually, I was thinking a little bit during the week about sort of, you know, the individual versus the kind of more collective nature, and agreeing with what Heiko and everyone has mentioned here tonight. I remember hearing a Dharma teaching recently enough that said, you know, ultimately we're not really individuals, we're actually an ecology in and of ourselves, and that, you know, even in terms of you know, that ecology, you know, whenever a particular, you know, species dies out or something, we're never the better from that, you know. So it's kind of this interdependence, kind of this inter relationship that is kind of always there at the height of things. And it's kind of, I think it's where we find ourselves, and it's also, again, you know, our solution, you know, this coming together and creating these kind of collectives, and to come up with ideas, you know, and to remain positive. So yeah, no, really, really interesting thoughts tonight, definitely.
Thank you. Yes, good. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And this is kind of, I suppose from a Buddhist point of view, you know, there's another kind of ecosystem, isn't it? It's the ecosystem of the mind. And we think of ourselves as having this individual mind, and we, you know, our thoughts and ideas might be influenced by what other people say, but we still think, you know, as my mind is here, like within this little sphere, and yours is over there in a different sphere, and you know, they can send messages to each other. But really, I think they're kind of all joined up. You know, my individual mind, so far as it is individual, is really just part of one big mind. It's this kind of oceanic mind, if you like. And yeah, Thomas Hubel, I mean, I think he has written a book actually, but I think I probably will at some point suggest watching one of his videos, because, or even to watch it, you know, take part live in one of his events that's coming up, because invariably you get this powerful experience of this collective consciousness field that is created by, I mean, even you know, just the four of us here tonight, we can say probably none of us would have had exactly the same thoughts that we're having now if we hadn't been connected up by this technology, you know. So there's mental activity happening that isn't individually anybody's, doesn't really belong individually to any one of us. There's a kind of, you know, we have a little collective mind right here. But when you're in a, you know, in a Zoom call with hundreds of people, and he talks very eloquently about it. As I say, it's not mystical. You know, because he does have a very deep scientific understanding of this kind of, he talks about resonance, and nervous systems resonate with each other. And this is, you know, this is very scientifically demonstrable. We have these mirror neurons and things, you know, that, I mean, whatever is going on in supposedly my head, you know, is all of these neurons interacting with each other, isn't it? It's not like there's me in there like operating the neurons as if they were one big computer and there was a me operating it. It's not like that. They're all doing their own thing, and collectively it creates this consciousness that's me. But my neurons are interacting with your neurons right now, you know. When I see your face, you know, your facial expression brings about a certain pattern of activity in my brain. So we're not separate. We're never separate, but we also can connect in very interesting ways like this. And like you say, you know, so we can think of it as like an ecosystem, you know, like the mind of humanity is an ecosystem. It's evolving, and this very activity that we're doing now is, I think, a very significant part of how that ecosystem of the mind, of the collective mind of humanity, is evolving. So, I mean, you know, I've been kind of feeling a little bit strange in this sort of situation of isolation, and this problem out there is a very physical problem with the, you know, the ecosystem, and all I'm doing is talking to people on Zoom. You know, okay, I've grown a few vegetables, but it doesn't amount to a hell of a lot. But at the same time, I do think, you know, this is a really vital part of the evolutionary process itself, what we're doing right now. So thank you, Celine, for that thought. Yeah.
There was another bit of positive news, I thought, this week, besides the declaration on biodiversity that you mentioned earlier on. That was a declaration by China, where they, for the first time, put down some more specific targets on reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And it was more ambitious than was generally expected. And they didn't have any specific targets before. And I think they said they're going to reduce by 2060 to net zero carbon emissions, which by itself, just China doing that on its own is enough to reduce temperature increases by between 0.2 and 0.4 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. So quite a bit. And it's being said, of course, like it's a big deal because it's a big country, and it will mean huge, massive investments in solar power and wind power, which will come together with further decreases in price and further technological developments in that area, which are going to drive the whole renewable energy thing, not just in China, but in other countries around the globe as well, because the technology is going to continue to become cheaper and better. And it's probably going to put more pressure on the United States as well and other countries to follow up.
Yeah, and it's another example of this kind of systemic change that can happen very suddenly because of, you know, within that economic system, there are positive feedback relationships, so that, and this means that there's certain tipping points where something that seemed to be not changing, suddenly changes. So for example, we saw with the coal industry like worldwide collapsed within a few years. Now the same's happening to the oil industry, and we can thank COVID-19, you know, because suddenly, you know, nobody was flying anywhere. People were not even driving very much. So suddenly there's an enormous glut of oil. Because I didn't quite understand this at first, but my brother phoned me one morning and he was in a kind of mood of hilarious glee. He said, I got to tell you this, he said, the price of oil in the United States now is now minus $35 a barrel. As a passionate climate activist, he's absolutely delighted by this. The oil industry is in bad trouble. It's been, you know, trouble's been looming for a while. You know, it's been looking shakier. It was the dominant industry in the world for many decades. But now it's at that tipping point where it's going to crash. Now, when the oil industry crashes, alternative energy will explode. I mean, there's nothing to stop it happening at a very, very fast pace. So, you know, projections, the curve has been going one way, it's been going well, and it has been looking not so good. But I think when that tipping point is passed, I mean, it's still gas, you know, gas is still a viable fossil fuel, and we probably need some gas for a while, but, you know, it's this property of complex systems that they change happens through interacting exponential processes, which means that things can flip very suddenly. And so we might see even more rapid change than what you're talking about, Heiko. I wouldn't be too surprised to see that. We don't know, but Yeah,
I'm
it's
very
very
helpful.
hard.
I'm very helpful that the politics of it can change very quickly, and people's minds. At the same time, I think something like the energy systems that the world relies on, even if you do make it like a project like people sending to the moon, it just is something so gigantic and costly that it will take some time, even at maximum speed, to sort of, it's just the will won't be enough. Even with maximum will, you're still going looking at 1, 2, 3 decades to change the whole energy system from
Well, one decade would be very fast. That would be fast enough.
that would be extremely fast. Yeah.
But things can happen. You know, things can accelerate. I mean,
oh sure.
We used to produce energy with enormous centralized systems, but now the transition is going to be to, I mean, solar power is a distributed energy system, and there are ways of manufacturing solar power units that are emerging that can, you know, can happen. Also, the manufacturing can happen at very small local scale. So that kind of thing, you know, things can happen very, very fast. And the same thing also with biological solutions as well. You know, if the right kind of biological solutions, reforestation, biochar, and things like that, permaculture, there's nothing, the barriers to those things happening are not physical barriers. It's really information traveling around. You know, that people, can people be taught quickly enough how to change their food production methods and so on, agriculture, to more sustainable methods and methods which put carbon back into the soil. So if it's an information problem, you know, as I was saying, we're seeing incredible sort of, I mean, I was in a Zoom conversation in this Compassion Festival with some people right in the remote part of rural Kenya, because we have a charity project out there that's working with those people. So, you know, I'm able to talk over the airwaves. You know, we're able to kind of have a direct conversation with people in that village. We could talk to them. I mean, I could connect them up with the permaculture group in Leeds to explain how they could, you know, given the situation, what's happened with climate change, how they could change their way they're growing their food. That could happen, of course, you know, could be replicated millionfold around the world. So changes, even though we don't think of those sort of biological processes as being, we tend to think of technology as very powerful and fast, and growing trees very slow, you know. But if, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I mentioned last week, the Trillion Tree Project. This World Economic Forum has this project to get 1 trillion trees planted, and you know, they're realists. They're not fantasizing. It's possible, and it doesn't take a gigantic mega project to do that. All it takes is getting that idea out in the right way around the whole internet, if you like. You know, ideas can travel at light speed, and sometimes the things that need to happen, all that needs to happen is an idea and an intention to be formed, isn't it? So it's coming back to political will. If that political will is really, as I think it might be, I think we might be just on the edge of that global political will coming together. And if it does, things may look very different. But I don't want to paint a very rosy picture or a very dark picture, you know. The picture I want to paint is, you really don't know. But what we do know is that if we do positive things, then there will be positive results. And connecting is important. I think that's the other thing that's come out of this discussion, you know. So even though there's only 4 of us, I don't want to get, you know, I think it's the quality of the connection that counts, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe 1 or 2 more more comments, and then we'll finish with a bit of meditation, or we can do that straight away. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking that progressive movements over the years have often been driven by splits, and which has weakened them from the inside. And I think that you need to be careful as a movement that we focus on what the problem is, and don't fall into proto-factionalism and things like that.
Of course, that's true, Tim. And of course, that does happen, and it is happening. But my perception is that it's happening less than it used to when I was first involved in activism of different kinds. I think that those lessons are being learned, and that's very hopeful, I think. Yeah, there's bound to be differences of opinion, and people are bound to get hot under the collar about things sometimes, and so on. But in general, I think that the spirit of, amity and the understanding of the need to be nonviolent and to be respectful to the other side is very much there, much more than it used to be. And I think that's very, very, that's a very hopeful thing. Yeah. But it is important. And
I think the training compassion is probably a good remedy for that sort of thing, and how we treat other people.
Well, yeah, you've got a point there, Tim. And I suppose because that's the other thing that I'm involved in at the moment. There's two main things that I'm doing: is this eco-dharma and compassion training, actually. So I'm in process of doing a teacher training on how to teach compassion training. So it hadn't occurred to me that I might use it within the ecology movement, that training. That's an interesting thought. Offer it to Extinction Rebellion as an idea. Yeah, and that's dead true. The problem that we were talking about of dualism, othering the other side, seeing them as different as the problem, seeing people or categories of people as the problem. And there's some very, very good, methods within this compassion cultivation training that I'm doing to address that, because it has to be addressed not just on the level of an intellectual understanding, but actually, an experiential change. And that's what this is about. So it's very interesting that this secular compassion training is spreading very widely. It's being, heavily emphasized by the Dalai Lama as one of the most important things. So what he's talking about, what the Dalai Lama is talking about these days, is the two biggest things that he's talking about is secular Buddhism and secular compassion on the one hand, and the problem of climate change and ecology on the other. So you're right that, makes sense that these two things need to come together. Yeah. So yes, well, that's I'm doing my I was going to say doing my bit. The Compassion Festival, and I may have mentioned it last week. Did I say this? That Satish Kumar gave the opening speech. Who's he was a Jain monk as a very young, as a boy actually. He left the monastery at the age of 18 to become a social activist. So he's been one of the leading figures in this kind of movement of spiritual activism or spiritual ecology. And he gave this opening speech of the Leeds Compassion Festival. And somebody put this question to him about, what do we say to people who feel very powerless in the face of the magnitude of this problem? And he told the story about a hummingbird. And he said, there's a forest fire, and the hummingbird flies to the ocean, and it brings back a drop of water in its beak, and it drops the drop of water on the fire. And the other animals say, what are you doing? Were you trying to put the fire out with this little drops of water from your beak? And the hummingbird says, well, I'm doing my bit. And I'll leave you with that thought. Yeah, it's a nice story, isn't it? And you never know what might be the effect of your drop of water, or our collective drop of water that we've dropped this evening. So shall we finish with a few minutes meditation? Okay. So, yeah, we've been using our vocal cords and our thinking mind a lot. And that kind of puts our body mind in a certain state. Slightly sort of agitated, excited, busy state. So let's just tune into how that is on a feeling level in our body. Notice that wide awake, busy energy there. That's kind of swirling around. Now that's maybe connected to some muscles being tense. Just experience that and see if we can allow those muscles to relax and those joints to move freely. And enjoy the calming sensation of our breath. Breathing in, breathing out. And letting the waves of the mind gradually settle down. So experience being in your body. We're embodied beings. And yet we are connected in some different way. On the level of mind, so there's mental activity going on and physical activity. And if we pay attention to just experiencing what's happening in the present moment, rather than thinking about it, you may notice there's no boundary between the two. I am a mental, physical being. And I am also part of a much bigger mental and physical process. It's like we're a little group of cells within this great body of Gaia, of life, this ocean of life, this web of life that we're part of. That we've got connected up for a certain period of time, bringing our thoughts together. Thoughts are not only some kind of abstract thing, but they connect to action as well. So if we've used this time well, as I believe we have, to share with one another our insights into how our thinking and our awareness can develop in a better way. Then those thoughts and that awareness will inevitably at some point lead to positive action. So in this we can rejoice. I am creating causes for positive results, causes that will help life to flourish more, better, causes that will contribute to a more positive outcome of this challenging time, this danger and difficulty that we're facing. So please take that to heart. Even though it's difficult right now to see in concrete terms what is the outcome of our meeting tonight. But as the Buddha tells us, the law of karma is infallible. We know it will lead to some positive result. And if you like, we can spend a moment or two just using our imagination. Think about what positive results would you want to see growing from our conversation tonight. And you can really let your imagination go. You can be quite ambitious. We can dedicate, as it is said, dedicate the positive energy that we've created tonight to whatever abundant flourishing of life we would like to see, we would want to see in our world. Just take a moment to tune in to your own vision of a positive ecological future and dedicate our energy to that. Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.
So, yes, now I was going to say see you next week, but I think that's not the case, actually. Yeah, next week is the Jamyang Lead's annual general meeting. So I have to be there as I'm a trustee. So unfortunately, it won't be a class next week, but there will be in 2 weeks' time, and then the week after that, and then the following week we're having a workshop. It's going to be same time, 2-hour workshop with Paul Wielgus from Jamyang Bar. So yeah. I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks, if you're not at the annual general meeting, which I don't know if any of you are planning to come to that.
Is that being on Zoom as well?
I think that it is. I mean, it's happening face to face.
Yeah.
But I think it is being put on Zoom as well. I'm not. I think so. I'm not absolutely certain.
Yeah. I'll probably join you by Zoom then if I can.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, good to see you, David.
Take care. Have a good week, everyone.
Thank you, and you. Take care. Bye.